On a freezing November night, a single mother almost shut her garage door on a homeless old white man shivering in the rain. She had $41 to her name, a 6-year-old asleep upstairs, and every reason in the world to leave him out there. She let him in for one night. That night, in his sleep, the old man whispered a single word: her dead mother's name. 21 days later, a lawyer would knock on that same door, holding a rusted tin box with 3 words scratched on the lid. And the truth this stranger had been carrying for 50 years would change everything. This is the story of a promise that walked through half a century of rain to find the right door. Stay with me to the very end. The last letter is the part you'll never forget. There are doors a person opens 1,000 times without thinking. The door to a kitchen at dawn. The door to a child's room at night. The door of a place you bleed for, that takes more than it gives. That you keep open anyway because keeping it open is the only way you know to keep on living. And then, once or twice in a life, there comes a door that asks to be opened in the dark, in the cold, in the rain. And what stands behind it is not a stranger at all, but the whole long arc of a love that left this earth years ago and never stopped walking toward you. This is the story of one such door. A garage door, rust at the seams, on a forgotten street in Akron, Ohio. And of the woman who almost did not open it. Her name was Naomi Brooks. The rain came down on Akron that November night the way grief comes. Slow at first, then all at once, then steady, as if it meant to keep falling until the end of the world. It ran in silver ropes off the eaves of the old shop, and found every gap in the metal roof, and tapped out its long, patient sermon on the bays below. Inside, beneath one bare bulb, Naomi Brooks was closing up. She was 36 years old, and she carried herself like a woman who had been carrying things for a long time. Her coveralls were dark with grease at the knees. Her hands were a working woman's hands, knuckles split, nails worn down, a thin white scar across one palm from a wrench that had slipped 2 winters back. She had been under cars since 7 that morning. Her feet had stopped speaking to her around noon. She had inherited this shop the same year she had inherited her mother's grave, and her mother's debts, and her mother's stubborn way of standing with her chin lifted, even when there was nothing in the till and nothing in the bank, and 2 more days until anyone, anywhere, was going to pay her. There was a yellow notice taped inside the office window. She knew its number by heart, the way you know the number of a sickness or a sentence. There were $41 in her wallet. And there was Theo. He was 6. He was upstairs in the little apartment over the shop, supposed to be asleep, and instead he was halfway down the stairs in his dinosaur pajamas with the rabbit she had sewn an ear back onto twice, watching his mother through the rail with the round and serious eyes of a child who has learned too early to watch. It was Theo who saw the old man first. "Mama?" he said, and then, more quietly, in the small, flat voice children use when they are afraid, "Don't open the bay door." Naomi turned. Out beyond the glass, beyond the silver ropes of rain, beneath the one security light that had been flickering for a year because she had never had the money or the heart to fix it, an old man sat against the brick wall of her shop. He sat the way a thing sits when the world has set it down and walked away, folded into himself, knees drawn up, hands resting in his lap. His coat was soaked black through. His hair, what there was of it, was white and plastered flat against a pale forehead. He was not knocking. He was not calling out. He was not begging. He was only shivering quietly, in the cold, the way a man shivers who has decided that asking for help would cost more than he has left to spend. Now there are a great many reasons in this life not to open a door like that, and Naomi Brooks knew every one of them. She had been raised by a mother who loved her fiercely and warned her constantly, in the same breath, with the same mouth. Be soft, Naomi girl, but not so soft the world can walk through you. Keep your heart open, but keep one hand on the latch. She had a child asleep above her head, and a door at the top of the stairs that she locked every single night, and every reason to keep it locked. She thought of all of this in the time it takes a heart to beat twice, and then she looked again at the old man in the rain, and what she saw undid every reason she had. He did not look dangerous. She had spent her whole life learning to read men quickly, and there was no storm in him. He was not drunk, not angry, not wild. He was tired, but not the tired that sits on a face for a night and is gone by morning. The other kind. The bone tired of a person who has been walking a long road for a very long time and has begun, quietly, to suspect there is no longer anywhere at the end of it. Naomi knew that tiredness. She saw it in her own mirror. She crossed to the side door and cracked it on the chain. The rain came louder. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once and thought better of it. "Sir," she called out, "you all right out there?" The old man lifted his head slowly, as though even that took more than he wished to admit. His eyes, when they found hers, were pale and gentle, and far too awake for a man who had been pretending to sleep. "Didn't mean to be a bother, ma'am," he said, his voice low and weathered, soft at the worn edges. "I tried to walk to the shelter on Exchange. They'd locked the doors by the time I made it." Naomi said nothing. "I'm not asking for money," the old man added, as if to spare her the awkwardness of refusing him. "Just somewhere dry till morning. A corner. Anything out of this rain. And then I'll be gone, and you'll never see me again." The answer should have been no. Every rule she had ever made stood up inside her and said no. She thought of Theo. She thought of the locked door at the top of the stairs, the sneakers drying on the radiator, the dinosaur nightlight he couldn't sleep without. "I've got a little boy in here," Naomi said. And the old man, and this was the first thing about him she would remember for the rest of her days, nodded at once, and lowered his eyes, and took the refusal from her hands before she could even finish offering it. "Then you do what keeps him safe," he said. "No shame in shutting that door, ma'am. You shut it, and go on up to that boy, and don't think on me another minute." He pressed a hand to the wet brick and pushed himself up. His left knee buckled, and for half a second his whole face folded around a pain he was too proud to let into the open. Then it passed, and he straightened and made ready to go back into the dark, as though the dark was simply where men like him belonged. And Naomi, watching him, thought of her mother. Loretta Brooks had died 9 years before, in a county hospital, with a plastic band on her wrist and apologies still on her lips, trying to the very last to be gentle with a world that had not, in all her 60 years, been gentle with her once. "Don't you worry over me, Naomi girl. You just take care of that baby." She had been a mechanic too, and the daughter of a mechanic, and she had stood in these very bays with her chin lifted and grease on her hands. The proudest poor woman Akron ever made. And there was something in the way this old white stranger took the refusal, without anger, without pleading, with a kind of worn-down grace that asked for nothing and forgave everything, that broke open in Naomi a place she kept shut even from herself. "Mama?" Theo whispered again behind her. She looked down. Her son's eyes were still frightened, But there was something else in them now, too. Something she recognized, because she had spent 6 years putting it there one bedtime at a time. The dangerous, stubborn, holy beginning of mercy. Naomi closed her eyes for the length of one breath. When she opened them, she unhooked the chain. "I need to see some ID." The old man reached, slow and careful, 2 fingers into his soaked coat, careful not to frighten her, the way a person is careful around a creature that has been hurt before, and drew out a state card, soft at the corners but readable still. Walter Pruitt, age 71. She photographed it and sent it to Miss Pearl next door, watched the check mark turn to 2, and only then looked at him again. "You'll sleep in the office. There's a cot. 1 night. My neighbor has your name and your face now. That door to the stairs stays locked. My boy is up there. And if I tell you to leave, you leave. We clear?" Walter looked at her the way a man looks at something he had stopped letting himself hope for. "No trouble," he said, so softly she almost lost it under the rain. "You have my word, Miss Brooks, Naomi Brooks." And at the name, something moved across the old man's face. A flicker, a flinch, a wound, deep and old and well hidden, turning over once in its long sleep. Naomi caught it. She caught everything. It was how she had survived. "Do I know you?" Walter lowered his eyes. "No, ma'am. I don't believe you do." But his voice had gone thin at the edges, thin as a man walking carefully around the rim of a hole in the floor, hoping no one would notice it was there. She noticed. She did not yet know what it meant, but somewhere in her, beneath the tiredness and the weariness and the rain, a small bell had begun, very faintly, to ring. The office behind the bays was small and cluttered and warm, the space heater ticking out its orange light. The cot against the wall had been her mother's and had not been slept on in 9 years. On the wall above it hung a wooden sign gone amber with age. Brooks Auto, established 1971, and beside it, pinned to a corkboard among invoices and a child's drawings, a photograph. A young black woman standing in front of this very shop when the sign was new, a wrench in one hand, her hair bound back with a scarf, her chin lifted, looking into the camera with the fearless joy of a person not yet told what the years intend to do to her. It was Loretta, Naomi's mother, young, and Walter Pruitt, drying himself with the thin blue towel, stopped and looked at that photograph a beat too long, a breath too long, a lifetime too long. And then, with what looked almost like effort, he made himself look away. "You didn't have to give up a clean towel," he said. "It's laundry day anyhow," Naomi said. It was not. He took it in both hands, the way a man takes a thing he is afraid of breaking. "Thank you, Miss Brooks." That night, when Theo was finally asleep upstairs behind his locked door, Naomi did not go to bed. She sat at the office desk in the orange light with her phone in front of her and a tire iron within reach. And she watched the old man sleep, and she did not trust the small bell that had begun to ring inside her, because she had learned long ago that hope was the most expensive thing a poor woman could buy. And near 2 o'clock in the morning, Walter Pruitt stirred. He turned his pale face toward the wall, and he spoke a single word into the dark, low and broken, and full of an old, old grief. "Loretta." Naomi went cold from her scalp to her heels. For a long time she did not move. She told herself, the way you tell yourself the things you cannot yet afford to believe, that it was nothing. That the world was full of women named Loretta, and full of old men whispering names into the dark, and that grief, when it walks, wears whatever face is nearest. But 21 days from that rainy night, a lawyer would stand at the door of her shop, holding a rusted tin box and a letter in her mother's own hand. And Naomi would remember every single thing about this night. The rain, the flickering light, the way his knee buckled and his pride caught it, the way his eyes had stopped on that photograph and could not leave. And she would understand then what she could not let herself understand now. That Walter Pruitt had not come to her door by accident. That he had come through the rain, through the long road of his own dying, carrying the last promise her mother ever made on this earth. By 6:30 the next morning, Naomi was awake. She came down the stairs into the gray, cold light of the shop, and she found that the old man was awake too. That was the first thing she noticed. The blanket, her mother's crocheted blanket, was folded into a neat square at the foot of the cot. The towel hung squared over the back of a chair, and his cracked, water-stained shoes were lined up by the door, toes pointing out, as though he had readied himself to walk back into the world before anyone could be put to the trouble of asking him to. "You didn't have to do all that," Naomi said. Walter turned. In the morning light, he looked older than he had in the rain. Face deeply lined, shoulders stiff, his wet coat hanging on him like something heavier than cloth. "I don't leave a place worse than I found it," he said. It was a small sentence, but it went into her like a splinter into a hand. For most people who had passed through Naomi Brooks's life had left something behind, a bill, a broken promise, a wound too small to explain and too deep to forget. They came into her life and took, and left the door swinging. This old man had slept in her office, and he had folded the blanket. Theo came down then, hair wild from sleep, the rabbit dragged by one ear. "Is the man still here?" "Only long enough to say thank you," Walter said, gently, carefully, like a man who knew how frightening a stranger can be to a small boy, and wished to be the smallest version of himself he could manage. "Did you sleep okay?" Theo asked. "Better than I deserved," Naomi frowned. "Don't say that." "Yes, ma'am." In the kitchenette there were 2 eggs, a hard heel of bread, and a jar of peanut butter scraped halfway down. Payday was 2 days off. Naomi closed the cabinet before Theo's eyes could linger on what was not in it. And Walter Pruitt, who had nothing, who did not know where in this cold world he would lay his head that night, saw her close it, and understood, and turned his eyes politely away. A man with nowhere to sleep, and still the grace not to look at her poverty. It moved her more than she would have admitted to a living soul. He reached for his coat. "I'll head on to the day center now, and trouble you no more." But when he stood, his left hand was trembling, a fine, helpless tremble he tried to hide by pressing his palm flat to the wall. Naomi had spent enough years around broken things and broken people to know pain when it walked in front of her. "You sick?" she asked. Walter paused. "No more than most men my age, Miss Brooks." "That's not an answer." A tired smile crossed his face. "Just worn down." He took one step toward the door, and the bad knee gave a second time, and the wall caught him. "Mama," Theo whispered. Naomi's jaw set. "Sit down," she said. "I won't be a burden to you. You've done more than I didn't ask you what you'd be. I told you to sit down." And he sat. She took the 2 eggs and made them stretch into 3 small plates the way her mother had taught her to stretch a little into enough, with milk, with bread cut into triangles, because Theo believed, with the unshakable theology of children, that triangles tasted better than squares. She gave Walter the chipped blue plate, and kept the smallest portion for herself, the way her mother always had, and the way Naomi only understood now, as a mother, what that smallness had cost. Walter looked down at the food, as though accepting it cost him a pain deeper than his knee. "Eat," Naomi said. And he did, slowly, almost reverently, the way a man eats who has not, in a long time, been handed anything without a price tacked onto it. "Where exactly are you headed?" she asked him. "There's a church off Copley," he said. "Sometimes the pastor lets folks sit inside, out of the weather, if he's about." "And if he isn't about?" And Walter Pruitt gave a small shrug, the shrug of people at the very bottom, who've been handed no so many times they've stopped expecting any other word. She hated that shrug. She hated it because she had felt it forming once or twice on her own shoulders. She thought of every warning her mother had ever given her. She thought of the locked door at the top of the stairs, and then she thought of an old man whispering her dead mother's name into the dark. "2 nights," Naomi said. "Same rules." Walter looked up at her, and his pale eyes softened, not with the triumph of a man who has won something, but with something far closer to grief. "I don't know how to repay you, Miss Brooks." "Start," she said, "by not making me regret it." She did not regret it. That evening she came back from a parts run with rain in her boots and a fire in the small of her back, bracing for chaos. Instead, she found the shop floor swept clean, and her tools hung back on the pegboard sorted by size, the way she hadn't had the strength to sort them in over a year. And on the office hot plate, a small pot of soup simmered, made from 1 potato and half an onion, and a few things she'd have sworn were far too little to ever become a meal, and which had, under the old man's patient hands, become exactly that. Theo was asleep at the desk, one cheek on an open picture book. "Hope you don't mind," Walter said low. The little one said he was hungry. And for the first time in more years than she could count, somebody had noticed she was tired without making her say it out loud, without asking her to name it, or thank them for it, or carry their noticing as one more thing on her back. She sat down beside her sleeping son and looked at the soup and the swept floor, and she did not cry, because she had long ago trained herself not to. But it was close. It was very close. Over the days that followed, the old man did not push. He stayed quiet and useful and very nearly invisible, which was, she would come to understand, the most extraordinary thing about him. For Naomi had known a great many people who helped loudly, people who fixed one thing and reminded you of it for a year, who handed you kindness the way a clerk hands you a receipt, the total printed plain at the bottom, so you would never forget what you owed. She had learned to flinch from help, because help, in her experience, was simply debt wearing a kinder coat. Walter Pruitt did the opposite of all of it. He oiled the hinge on the bay door that had screamed like a wounded animal every dawn for 2 winters, and never said a word. She only noticed, the next morning, that the dawn had come in silence. He retapped a stripped bolt on the lift she'd been terrified would fail under a customer's car, and did not announce it. She only found, the next time she raised it, that it rose smooth and held true. He fixed the latch on the office window. He stopped the toilet from running. One small misery at a time, he went quietly through her shop and mended the things that had been wearing her down for years, and then he stepped back from each one, as though goodness was a thing meant to be left behind quietly, where no one could see, and no one would have to say thank you. She was used to people who helped so that you would owe them. She had never met a man who helped so that you would not have to. And then there was the matter of the engines. On the 4th day, she watched him chase a misfire she'd been hunting for 2 days, not with a code reader, not with a chart, but with his head tilted and his eyes half closed, listening, the way a doctor listens to a chest. And he found it. He laid one finger on a hairline crack in a vacuum line that no scanner on Earth would have shown her, and the engine, when she started it again, ran true and smooth, like a thing that had been forgiven. "Where did you learn all that?" she asked. Walter wiped his hands, slow, and did not look up. "A shop, long time ago. Best people I ever knew. They taught me a man can hear what's wrong with an engine if he learns to be quiet enough to listen." He folded the rag into a careful square. "I know a little," he said, "about things people give up on too soon." And there was something in how he said it that made her feel, without being able to say why, that he had not been talking only about engines. On the 6th night, she came home late and found Theo curled against the old man's side on the cot, a library book open across both their laps, Walter reading aloud. His voice was deep and rough and unhurried, and he gave each animal its own clumsy voice, a low growl for the bear, a soft southern lilt for the grandmother, and Theo was laughing into his sleeve, trying with his whole small body to keep quiet so it would not end. Naomi stopped in the doorway, and her heart turned over. For no man had ever read to Theo. Not his father, who had left before the boy could walk. Not anyone who'd passed through their lives and out again, leaving the door swinging. And here was a stranger she'd met in the rain, doing the voices. Walter looked up and closed the book halfway, guilt rising. "I'm sorry," he asked, and I— "Mama," said Theo, "he does the voices." She had meant to be strict, to remind her son not to grow attached to a stranger who'd be gone in a week. Instead, she set down her bag. "One story," she said. And Theo beamed like the sun coming up. She stood at the sink washing a mug that was already clean, just to stay and listen without being seen to listen. The old man read on, and the bay door did not scream, and the lift did not groan, and the window did not rattle. And for the first time in a long, long while, Naomi Brooks's home did not sound like survival. It sounded like shelter. And then, near the end of the story, Walter paused and looked down at the boy's upturned face and said very softly, almost to himself, "You've got her eyes." Naomi turned off the water. "What did you say?" Walter blinked, and the gentleness drained from his face, replaced by fear, not of her, but of a man who has stepped in an unguarded moment, 1 foot over a line he had sworn not to cross. "I said he's got kind eyes," he answered. Kind eyes, the little one. But Naomi Brooks had lived too long and listened too hard and survived too much to be lied to about a thing like that. You've got her eyes. Not kind eyes. Her eyes. And down in the deep places of her, the small bell that had begun to ring on the first night rang again, clear now and impossible to silence. And with it came her mother's name, rising like a ghost out of still water. Loretta. She did not sleep that night. In the morning she put the question to him plainly across the office desk while Theo was still upstairs. "How do you know my mother's name?" Walter's hand paused over the coffee cup. He set it down. He was quiet a moment, and the quiet was worse than any answer. "I knew a woman named Loretta once," he said. "A long time ago. There are a lot of women named Loretta." Her voice was level only because she was holding it level with both hands. "Did you know my mother?" His eyes went, against his will, to the photograph on the corkboard, then back to her. I knew someone kind, he said. Someone who loved her girl more than she loved her own breath. My mother has been dead 9 years. I know, said Walter. I'm sorry. And the apology was too heavy, too low, too personal. It was not the apology of a stranger hearing of a stranger's death. It was the apology of a man who had grieved her, too. That, Naomi said, is not an answer. His hands trembled where they rested on his knees. I don't want to bring pain into your house, Miss Brooks. You already brought questions into it. You've slept under my roof. You've eaten at my table. You've read my son to sleep. Don't you stand in my shop and tell me the truth needs better timing. Walter bowed his head, and for the first time he looked smaller than his 71 years. You're right, he said. You have every right to ask. He opened his mouth, and from the top of the stairs, Theo's voice came down, thin and complaining. His nightlight had gone out, and the morning required his mother. The moment broke like a thread pulled too tight. Maybe it saved Walter from answering. Maybe it saved Naomi from hearing what she was not yet ready to hold. This isn't finished, she said. No, ma'am, he answered. It isn't. It finished 2 days later, and not the way she had planned. Theo had begged for one more story after supper, and halfway through it, Walter coughed. It bent him double over the book and went on too long, and when it let him go, his face had gone the gray-white of old ash, and his hands could not hold the page. The book slipped to the floor. Mama! Theo sat up sharp. Naomi was across the room before she knew she'd moved. Mr. Pruitt. I'm all right, he whispered, though plainly he was not. She reached for his coat, folded over the chair, for a handkerchief, and the old wallet slipped from the pocket, struck the concrete, and fell open. A photograph slid out onto the gray cement between them. Naomi went still. It was old, its corners worn round and pale from years of being held. In it stood a young black woman, bright-eyed, with a wide, tired, beautiful smile, a wrench in one hand, and a blue scarf binding back her hair. And beside her, one hand on the fender of an old Ford pickup, grinning like a young man who has not yet learned a single thing the years intend to teach him, stood Walter Pruitt. Young, strong, whole. Naomi knew the woman before her mind would let her say the word. The scarf, the wrench, the chin lifted just so. It was her mother. Loretta Brooks, not sick, not fading in a county bed, but young and alive and laughing, in front of this shop, back when the world had not yet broken a single one of its promises to her. She bent and picked it up off the floor. Her hand shook. You lied to me. I didn't want to, said Walter, and the pain in his eyes was no longer hidden. God knows I didn't want to. How long have you had this? He looked at it the way a man looks at a thing that holds both his heaven and his sentence. More than 50 years. 50? She could barely make the word. Long before Theo. Long before the debts, the funeral, the box of her mother's earrings. How did you know her? And Walter Pruitt closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he told her. Your grandfather built this shop, he said. 1971. But I knew it before the sign, back when it was just Otis Brooks and one bay and more heart than money. I was a white boy with no people, none at all. My mother gone, my father a mean drunk I'd run from at 16, and not a soul in this city who'd give a homeless white kid with grease under his nails the time of day. And Otis Brooks took me in. A black man, in this town, in those years. He took in a white stray off the street, fed me at his own table, put a wrench in my hand, taught me a trade. And his daughter Loretta taught me to listen, to be quiet enough to hear what was wrong. Everything I know because that family chose to love a boy the world had thrown out. His voice had gone rough. And I loved her, Miss Brooks, your mother. I won't lie to you about that, not now, not at the end of everything. But it was 1968, and a white man and a black woman who loved each other, in this town, in those years, that was not a thing the world would let stand. It was dangerous for me, a good deal more for her and for her whole family, and they were the only family I had. So she chose your father, and she was right to. He could give her a life out in the open, in the daylight, that I never could. I made my peace with it. I stayed her friend. I stood up at her wedding in the back where folks wouldn't talk. And when life pulled me on to other cities, other shops, other troubles, I carried that photograph into every one of them. 50 years. Through everything I lost. It was the last thing I'd have let go of. Naomi's anger had gone very still inside her. It had not vanished, but it had quieted, the way a storm quiets when something larger moves in behind it. "Then why come like this?" she said, and her voice cracked. "Why sit out in the rain and let me think you were nobody? Why not knock and say her name?" "Because your mother asked me to find you," Walter said. "Before she died. She made me promise. And I was afraid." His voice broke, and he steadied it. "I was afraid you'd open that door and see an old white stranger in the dark, and see danger before you ever saw the promise. And you'd have been right to. A woman alone with a child? You'd have been right to shut that door in my face. So I sat down in the rain instead and tried to find the courage to knock. And I couldn't. Not till you opened it yourself." The floor seemed to shift under Naomi Brooks. "She knew where I was," she said. "Not at the end," said Walter gently. "You'd moved when the rent went up on the old place. Your number had changed. Some records had your married name on them, and some still said Brooks. And your mother. By the end, she was sicker than she ever let you see. And she was ashamed of how much paperwork had slipped through her hands while she was busy just staying alive one more day, one more day, one more day for you. She'd lost track of her own daughter, and it broke her heart. And she made me swear that if I could ever find you, I'd put a thing into your hands myself. The thing she couldn't." "Why didn't she just tell me?" Naomi whispered. "About you. About any of it." Walter was quiet a long moment. "Some of that's hers to tell, not mine," he said at last. "And some of it she kept quiet a long time ago, to keep the both of us safe. Back when keeping quiet was the only way two people like us could go on living in this town at all. And later, I think..." He looked toward the corkboard, toward the photograph of the laughing girl with the wrench. "Later, I think she didn't want to hand you a complicated story. She wanted to leave you something simple. She wanted the last word she gave you to be just the one word. Love. Not a tangle, not a secret. Just that." He looked at Naomi then, really looked at her, full in the face, for the first time. And she stopped seeing a burden. She stopped seeing a stranger. She stopped seeing a man with secrets folded into his wet coat. She saw instead what had been in front of her the whole time, and what she had been too frightened to let herself see. A man who had carried a grief and a love and a promise alone for 50 years, down a road that had been taking everything from him the entire way, and who had walked it all to her door. "There's a box," Walter said. "Not here, with a lawyer." "The kind of box your mother made me swear I'd put into your hands the very day I found you. I've found you now, Miss Brooks. I've kept her promise. The rest belongs to you." For 12 days, Walter Pruitt did not push her toward that box or toward anything. He stayed quiet and gentle and useful and asked for nothing. And slowly, one small mended thing at a time, the shop began to change around her. He rebuilt the carburetor on a contractor's truck Naomi had nearly turned away as too far gone, and the contractor came back the next week with 2 more trucks and cash in hand, and that cash made the loan payment that Friday, the first she'd made on time in 3 months. She stood in the office with the receipt and had to sit down. He taught Theo to tell a Phillips head from a flathead by feel, in the dark, turning it into a game with prizes of buttered toast. He carried the diner's leftovers up the stairs when Miss Pearl left a bag, pretending it was extra. And everyone on that small triangle of street knew it was not extra, and no one said so, because that is how the poor have always loved one another, sideways, so as not to wound. He never went up the stairs. The locked door stayed locked, and he never tried it, never let his eyes rest on it. He never raised his voice, never asked for $1 or a thank you, or a single thing larger than the small square of floor she had granted him. By the 9th day, Theo had stopped calling him Mr. Pruitt unless reminded. By the 11th, Naomi had stopped reaching for the tire iron at night. That same evening she came in bone-tired and found a note on the desk in careful, old-fashioned block letters. Miss Brooks. Theo finished his reading and did the bear voice. "The truck in Bay 2 is done. Keys on the hook. Soup's on low. Please eat before it goes cold. W.P." And no one in years and years had written her anything that gentle. On the 12th morning, Walter was already dressed when she came down. His coat was buttoned to the throat, his wallet in his hand, and the photograph of young Loretta was no longer in it. He had set it on the desk facing her, where she would be sure to find it. "What are you doing?" "Leaving," said Walter. Theo's head came up sharp. "Leaving where? You didn't finish the spring story. You said the little house waits all winter because it knows the spring will come." Walter smiled at the boy, and his mouth trembled. "I think your mama can finish that one, son." "You said the box was with a lawyer," Naomi said, arms crossed over the tightness in her chest. "You said there were answers. Why leave before I get them?" And Walter looked at her with an exhaustion deeper than his years, deeper than his bad knee. "Because I didn't come here," he said, "to turn into something you'd have to lose twice." The words emptied the whole shop of sound. Naomi could not answer them. Walter turned to Theo and knelt down, slow, his stiff knees protesting the whole way. He did not reach out and take hold of the boy. He simply held out one open hand, palm up, and waited. Waited to be chosen. The way he had spent his whole life waiting to be chosen, and asking for nothing. And Theo stepped into him and threw both arms around his neck. Walter closed his eyes and held him, as though the holding were both the greatest mercy of his life and the cruelest punishment, both at once. When Theo stepped back, the old man looked at his small face a long moment. "You're a brave boy," he said, "and you've got eyes like somebody I loved very, very much. This time, he did not take it back. At the door, he paused and looked once around the shop. The swept floor, the tools hung by size, the cot with its folded blanket, the photograph of a girl who had taught a thrown-away boy to listen to an engine in a year that did not want them to be friends. Then he looked at Naomi. "Your mother was proud of you," he said, "long before you ever found out how hard this world was going to be. She was proud of you before you'd done one single thing but be born to her." Naomi's voice broke in half. "How do you know that?" His pale eyes filled. "Because she told me." And then he opened the door, and the cold came in off the rain, and Walter Pruitt walked down the wet street with his collar up and his bad knee dragging. He did not look back, and the door swung shut, and for the first time since the rainy night he had come, the shop was too quiet, and the quiet had a shape, and the shape was the shape of him. 9 days later, Walter Pruitt died. 21 days after the rainy night, the lawyer came. In the days between, Naomi found the old man everywhere. Not in things he had left behind, but in things he had mended. The bay door that opened in silence each dawn, the lift that rose smooth and held, the window that did not rattle, the latch that slid true. He had gone through her shop like a man repairing not only metal, but the small daily griefs that had been grinding her down for years, then stepped away from every one of them, so that the only proof he had been there at all was the absence of suffering where suffering used to live. Theo missed him without any of the armor adults learned to hide it behind. At bedtime, he would stop beside the empty cot and ask, "Do you think Mr. Walter finished the spring story somewhere else, Mama?" And Naomi always gave the same answer, "I hope so, baby." But hope had begun to feel uneasy in her chest. Walter had not called. He had not come back. Some nights she told herself it was for the best, and other nights she sat at the desk after Theo slept and held the photograph he'd left behind, and did not believe, even a little, that any of it had been for the best. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon, there came a knock at the office door. Not a customer's, not Miss Pearl's quick, familiar tap, but firm and careful and official. The knock of a man who had practiced not frightening people. Through the window she saw him, a thin man in a dark overcoat, a leather folder under one arm, and held against his chest in both hands a small, rusted tin box. "Miss Naomi Brooks," he said when she opened the door. "My name is Arthur Klein. I'm an attorney. I've come on behalf of Mr. Walter Pruitt." At the old man's name, Naomi unfastened the chain before her fear could talk her out of it. "Is he?" The question got away from her before she could find a gentler shape for it. "Is he all right?" Arthur Klein lowered his eyes, and in the half-second before he spoke, the whole little office seemed to tilt on its foundations. "He passed 9 days ago, Miss Brooks," the lawyer said, and his voice was kind. "He asked me to wait until today before I came to you. I am very sorry to be the one to bring it." Behind her, Theo dropped the apple he was holding. It struck the floor and rolled, a small and helpless sound in the silence. Naomi gripped the doorframe, and she saw it all at once, the way a drowning person is said to see a life. Walter folding the blanket into its careful square. Walter with his head tilted, listening to an engine the way you listen to a heartbeat. Walter kneeling slow and stiff so a small boy could reach his arms around an old man's neck. Walter at the door, in the cold, saying the words she had not understood and now understood completely. "I didn't come here to turn into something you'd have to lose twice." He had known. All along, he had known. He had walked into their lives already knowing he was leaving them twice over, and he had done it anyway, because a promise made to a dying friend 50 years his junior was the last thing left on this earth that he could still keep. The lawyer held out the rusted tin box. It was old. The kind cookies came in once, rust biting at all four corners, and across the lid, in faded black marker gone soft and gray with the years, were 3 words written in a hand that stopped Naomi's heart. For my Naomi. Her knees nearly gave. Theo's small hand found hers and held on. "Grandma wrote that," he whispered. "That's Grandma's writing." "There's a letter, too," Arthur Klein said gently, drawing from his folder an envelope yellowed with age, but sealed with great care. "From your mother, from Loretta Brooks. Mr. Pruitt kept it safe for 9 years, through more hardship than you'd believe a man could carry, until he could put it into your hands himself. And there are documents I'll walk you through whenever you're ready. A deed, a small trust, and a savings account your mother set up long ago, with Mr. Pruitt's help." "My mother," Naomi said, "didn't have anything." Arthur Klein looked down at the rusted box between them. "She had more than she ever let you see, Miss Brooks," he said. And that broke something open in Naomi Brooks. Not because the words sounded like wealth. They did not. They sounded like sacrifice. They sounded like a woman skipping her own medicine to fold $2 into an envelope. Like a mother saying, "I'm not hungry, baby, you eat," across a table for 30 years. Like hands counting out small bills in the dark, while the mouth above them said, "Don't you worry, everything's just fine." "Come in," Naomi said. "Please, come in out of the cold." She opened her mother's letter at the office desk beneath the corkboard, with Theo pressed warm against her side and the lawyer waiting quietly across from her, his hat in his hands. The paper inside was thin and yellow. Her mother's handwriting trembled and wandered in places, as if some of the lines had been set down on days when the sickness was winning and the pen was heavy. Naomi read, "My sweet Naomi girl, if this letter has found its way to you, then Walter found you, and you must not be angry with him for taking his time about it. Good men can be slow when the promise they're carrying is bigger than their own poor, frightened heart. And, child, there was never a better man, nor a more frightened one, nor one I trusted more." Naomi pressed her fingers to her lips. Theo leaned in closer. "I wanted to tell you all of this myself, while I could still sit up and hold your hand. But the sickness took more days from me than I had counted on. I kept waiting for one good morning, one clear breath, one single hour when I could talk to you without it making you cry. That hour never came, baby. So I'm writing it down instead, and trusting it to the one man on this earth I knew would carry it the whole way." The tears were running down Naomi's face now, and she did not wipe them. "You know the shop. What you don't know is this. When the hospital bills started to come, and Naomi, they came like the rain, until there was no end of them. I was terrified they'd take it, the building, the land, the one thing my father ever left us, the one thing with the Brooks name on it. So Walter helped me put the shop, and a little house I'd kept back, into a small trust where the creditors couldn't reach. Not to keep secrets from you, my love. To keep one thing in this whole grasping world that it couldn't swallow before you were strong enough to hold it. There's a savings account, too. It isn't much, but every dollar in it came from a day I told you I wasn't hungry. A shift I told you was easy when my feet were bleeding in my shoes. Birthday money I said I'd spent on myself and never did. Don't you dare mourn those days, Naomi girl. A mother does not count what she gives her child as a thing lost. She counts it as the only wealth she ever truly had. Now, about Walter, because you'll be wondering, and he's too humble a man to tell you himself. He was my oldest friend in this world. When we were young, this city would have made the two of us pay dearly just for being friends across the line they'd drawn, and it tried to, more than once. But he stood by me and my daddy when we had no one, and he was happy at my wedding, truly happy, the way only a person who loves you without wanting to own you can be. If he comes to you worn down to nothing, and I'm afraid he will, know that whatever he's carrying my sorrow inside it, as well as his own. There was nothing in this for him but the keeping of a promise to a dying woman who could give him nothing back. Remember what kind of love asks for nothing. I'm sorry, my sweet girl, for every hard day you had to get through without me. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to watch that baby of yours grow. But if you're reading this, then some part of me reached you after all, and that's more than I dared to pray for. Take the shop, take the house, take the rest I couldn't give you while I was still breathing. And when the world gets heavy, and it will, baby, you hold on to this one thing and never let it go. You were never left behind, not for one single day of your life. Love was still walking toward you the whole time, even when it was slow, even when it came late, even when it showed up at your door, an old man in a wet coat, in the rain. Your mama always, Loretta. Naomi lowered the letter, and for a long time no one in the office spoke. The heater ticked. The window did not rattle. The whole worn little room, the peeling paint, the swept floor, the cot with its folded blanket, the pegboard of tools hung by size, seemed touched all at once by a grief older and larger than the room itself, a grief that had been walking toward this moment for 50 years. Theo reached out and touched the bottom of the page with one small finger, where the ink trembled. "Grandma loved you a lot," he said. And Naomi Brooks broke. Not loudly, not all at once. She bent over the desk and pressed her mother's letter to her chest, as though paper could turn back into arms, as though ink could turn back into a heartbeat. And she wept, the deep, undefended weeping of a daughter who has just heard her mother's voice cross 9 years of silence to find her. Theo wrapped both his arms around her waist and held on with his whole small strength. The lawyer waited and looked away and let her have it. When at last she could breathe again, Naomi lifted her ruined face and said, "Tell me about him. All of it. I let that man sleep in my shop. I let him read to my boy. I need to know everything he was." And Arthur Klein told her much of what Walter had already confessed, and the rest of it too. How life had pulled the man on and away after Loretta married. Other cities, other shops, a marriage that failed, a long stretch of years that took more than it gave, and how through all of it he had kept one photograph in his wallet, soft-cornered from 50 years of being held. And he told her about the search. When your mother fell ill, Klein said, she called him. She'd lost track of you by then. The move, the changed number, the married name on half the records and Brooks on the other half. She was afraid the bills would swallow the shop and the house before you could be found, and she trusted exactly one person on this earth not to misuse what she had left. So she made him the holder of the trust and made him promise to find you. And then she died. The lawyer turned his hat in his hands. Walter Pruitt was already sick by then, Miss Brooks. Already most of the way to broke. And he spent more than 2 years looking for you, and never once let me get $1 of it back to himself. He searched from library computers. He walked neighborhoods on a bad knee. He spent his own last money on bus fare and copies of county records. And more than one night, he slept where no one asks your name. An old man, dying, with no stake in it but a promise, looking through a whole city for a woman who had every reason to slam the door in his face. "Why didn't he just tell me?" Naomi whispered. "The night he found me. Why sit in the rain?" "Because he was afraid you'd think he'd come to trick you. An old white stranger out of the dark, claiming to know your dead mother, holding papers about your shop. You'd rather sit in the rain 100 nights than have you see danger before you saw the truth. And, I think, he wanted to be sure the promise had led him to the right Naomi Brooks, her girl." "The right Naomi Brooks," she said bitterly, "was barely surviving." "He knew that," said Klein very quietly. "That's why he called me, the day after he left your shop. He said—" The lawyer paused, and when he went on, his own voice was not entirely steady. He said, "Arthur, I found Loretta's girl. She's tired down to the bone, but she's got her mother's whole heart, every bit of it. And the boy—" Klein looked at Theo. "The boy laughs like spring." Theo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "He said that? About me?" "He did, son," said Arthur Klein. "Those were very near his last words to me." He drew out one final page, unsealed, with Walter's name across it in those careful old block letters, and he laid it in front of Naomi. She read it through her tears. "Miss Brooks, if you're reading this, then I've done the one thing I promised your mother I would do, and I can lay this old burden down at last and go to my rest with a quiet heart. I came to your door in the rain because I needed, before I died, to see with my own eyes the woman Loretta loved so fierce. And I found her. I found her in the way you turned the lock on that stair door to keep your boy safe. And in the way you opened the other door anyhow, for a stranger in the cold. I found her in a shop with almost nothing in the till, and still a plate of eggs for a man who could give you nothing back. You are your mother straight through. Don't you ever think I came to test you. You owed me nothing. I was the one being handed the gift. For 12 days, an old man with nowhere left to go got to sit where Loretta's love was still alive and breathing, and hear an engine come back under his hands, and read a brave boy to sleep. After everything this life took from me, it gave me that at the very end. Thank you for the cot. Thank you for the soup. Thank you for the towel on laundry day that we both knew wasn't laundry day. Thank you for letting an old man finish a promise before the Lord called him in out of the rain. Be good to yourself, Naomi Brooks. Raise that boy who laughs like spring, and keep that one hand on the latch. But you keep the door open, too. It's the truest thing your mother left in the world. Walter Pruitt. Naomi lowered the letter. Theo was crying openly now, and she gathered him into her lap and held him hard and rocked herself in the quiet of the office. For her whole life, she had believed help never came except to collect. That every open hand would close around something of yours before it left. That kindness was a loan whose interest found you eventually in the dark. But Walter Pruitt had asked for nothing, and her mother had asked for nothing. Both of them had simply loved her, fiercely and at a cost, from a place she could not see, for as long as they drew breath, and then, somehow, beyond it. Arthur Klein slid the deed across the desk. The shop is free and clear, Miss Brooks. Yours and your son's. Your mother saw to all of it with Walter's help, before either of them was gone. And there's the house, out past the edge of town. It still has the yellow curtains your mother hung in the front window with her own hands." Naomi could not, for a moment, make her mind hold the shape of it. She had spent her whole life entering places that belonged to someone else. Rented rooms, hospital corridors, other people's shops, grocery aisles where she counted coins before the register. She had become an expert in the temporary. This was not temporary. This had been waiting. "Does it have yellow curtains?" Theo whispered, lifting his wet face. "Like the little house that waits all winter?" "I think," Naomi said softly, and her voice did not break this time, "we should go and find out." The little house stood at the end of a quiet street, out past where the town gave up and the fields began, under a wide, pale sky. It was not grand, and never had been. The white paint had weathered to the color of old paper. One shutter hung crooked. Weeds pushed through the cracks in the walkway, and the porch leaned a little, the way an old person leans, from the long carrying of years. But behind the glass of the front window, faded soft by all those seasons of sun, were yellow curtains. "Mama," Theo breathed from the back seat. "Grandma's curtains, just like the story." Naomi sat behind the wheel a long while before she could move. She simply looked at the small house her mother had somehow held on to, across sickness, debt, silence, distance, and death, and saved and kept and pointed toward her like an arrow loosed 50 years ago, only now coming home to its mark. Arthur Klein pressed an old brass key into her palm. "Your mother wanted you to have this. She wanted it more than she wanted her own ease at the end. I was there." It felt far too light to be carrying so much love. She fitted it to the lock and turned it. The door opened on the smell of dust and wood and time. Sunlight came through the yellow curtains and fell across the bare floor in soft golden squares. The front room was nearly empty. A rocking chair, a sofa under a sheet, a small table by the window. And on that table, in a plain frame, a photograph. Loretta, young and laughing, standing on the porch of this very house, with one hand raised against the sun, as though waving across the years to whoever would one day come and find her. Naomi crossed the room and touched the frame with trembling fingers.
"Oh, Mama, you kept it. All this time you kept it for me."
"She looks happy here," said Theo. "I think she was, baby. I think this is where she was happiest of all." Upstairs, a little bedroom faced the backyard, where a bare maple tree stood patient against the sky, waiting, the way the little house in the story waited, for a spring it had not stopped believing in. Theo turned slowly in a circle. "Is this one mine?" Naomi looked at the peeling wallpaper, the narrow window, and then at her son, his face turned up to her, hardly daring. "Yes, baby," she said, and her voice broke clean in two at last. "This one's yours." He ran to the window and pressed both hands to the glass. "I can put my books right here," he said, the whole future opening in his small voice. "And my rabbit, and maybe a little desk, a real one, for my reading." A little desk, such a small dream, such a holy and ordinary thing. Naomi pressed her hand to her mouth and let the tears come. Later, when the lawyer had gone, Naomi and Theo sat together on the front steps of the little house, with their coats pulled close against the cold, and the neighborhood lay quiet around them. And somewhere, a dog barked once, and a wind chime sang on a porch across the way. Naomi held 2 letters in her 2 hands, her mother's in the one, Walter's in the other. 2 voices, two promises. One from the woman who had given her life, and one from the man who had carried that love the whole long rest of the way to her door. Theo leaned his head against her shoulder. "Mama," he said, "do you think Mr. Walter can see us? From up there?" Naomi looked at the yellow curtains glowing gold in the front window. "I hope so, baby," she said. "Do you think Grandma can?" She kissed the top of her son's head and held both letters a little tighter.
I think love like that doesn't disappear when a person does,
she said slowly, finding the words as she said them, the way you find your footing in the dark.
I think it just keeps going. I think it finds roads we don't even know are there. I think it walks a long, long way. In the cold, in the rain, for years and years. And it doesn't stop. It doesn't ever stop. It just keeps walking until it gets where it was always trying to go.
Theo was quiet for a while. Then he said, in the small, clear voice of a child saying a true thing for the first time,
"He wasn't really a stranger, was he, Mama?"
And Naomi remembered the rain, the flickering light, the old coat soaked black, the folded hands in the lap, the worn voice asking only for somewhere dry until morning, the blanket folded into its careful square, the engine coming back to life under listening hands. "I didn't come here to turn into something you'd have to lose twice."
"No,"
she said softly.
"No, baby. He wasn't a stranger."
He was a promise. He was your grandmother's love, walking. And it took him 50 years and a bad knee and a long road in the rain, but he kept it. He kept it all the way to our door. In the weeks and months that came after, no miracle erased every hardship. The bills did not all vanish. Some mornings were still hard, and the world did not suddenly become a gentle place. But the shop was theirs now, free and clear, with the Brooks name on the deed and the sign. And the house was theirs, with its yellow curtains and its leaning porch and its patient maple tree. And the soup could simmer on the stove without anyone listening, in the back of her mind, for the sound of a notice taped to the door. And slowly, one mended thing at a time, the way Walter himself had taught her, the little house began to breathe again. Naomi painted the front door blue. Theo planted marigolds beneath the front window and watered them too much, and they grew anyway. Miss Pearl drove out one Sunday with a casserole, and when she came up the walk and saw those yellow curtains, she stopped and set the dish on the porch rail and cried. On the first truly warm Saturday of the spring, Naomi set a second frame on the small table by the window, beside the photograph of her mother, the one the old man had left behind. Young Loretta, laughing, and the smiling boy beside her with his hand on the fender of an old Ford, and his whole hard life still ahead of him. Two guardians of one small life, finally come home and set side by side. That evening, she stood in the doorway and watched her son run barefoot across the backyard under the maple tree, which had begun, at the very tips of its branches, to put out the first green of the year. He ran and he laughed, and the sound of it carried back to her across the long grass, and Naomi understood at last exactly what her mother had meant. The boy laughs like spring. For the first time in more years than she could count, Naomi Brooks did not feel like a woman merely surviving the day she was standing in. She felt rooted. She felt held. She felt loved by hands that no longer drew breath in this world, and were somehow, even now, still working on her behalf, still mending, still folding the blanket, still walking toward her in the rain. She looked up at the sky, where the light was lowering gold and easy over the little house with the yellow curtains, and the tears that stood in her eyes did not fall and did not burn.
"Thank you, Mama,"
she whispered. And then she looked through the window at the second photograph, at the old man who had come to her through the cold and the long unkindness of 50 years, and had asked for nothing and given her everything.
"And thank you,"
she said, "for finding us." Behind her, the little house stood warm and quiet and hers. Ahead of her, in the long gold grass, her son laughed like spring. And for the first time in a very long time, Naomi Brooks opened a door. The blue front door of her own house into the soft, cool evening. Not out of fear, and not out of mercy, and not because the world demanded it of her. She opened it out of peace. She was finally home.